Eleanor Grayson sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd served countless dinners, planned family vacations, and balanced the household budget for 40 years. The wood was worn smooth, a testament to decades of love and labor. Her hands, now lined with age, traced the grooves absent-mindedly as she stared at the letter in front of her. It was crisp, official, and cold divorce papers from Richard, her husband of 4 decades. The words blurred as tears welled in her eyes, not from sorrow alone, but from the sting of betrayal. For 40 years, Eleanor had been the backbone of their marriage. She'd left her teaching job to raise their 2 children, managed the home, and supported Richard's ambition to climb the corporate ladder. His late nights at the office, his international trips, his endless networking events made it all possible. She packed his suitcases, ironed his shirts, and smiled through his absences, believing they were building a life together. But now, at 67, she was alone, with a bank account drained by his reckless spending and a heart shattered by his departure. The letter explained little. Richard had found someone else, a younger woman, someone who understood his needs. He'd left her nothing but the house, which was mortgaged to the hilt, and a pile of bills she couldn't pay. Eleanor's chest tightened as she remembered the sacrifices, the dreams she'd shelved, the promotions she'd declined, the savings she'd poured into his ventures. She'd trusted him, believed in their shared future. Now, that future was a cruel mirage. Yet, amidst the pain, a flicker of defiance stirred within her. Eleanor wasn't one to wallow. She'd always been practical, resourceful. Years ago, unbeknownst to Richard, she'd started investing small sums money scraped from grocery budgets, birthday gifts, and odd jobs she took when the kids were grown. She'd read books on finance, attended free seminars, and quietly built a modest portfolio. It wasn't much, but it was hers, hidden from Richard's reckless grasp. The investments hadn't matured yet, but they were her lifeline, her secret hope. She stood, wiping her tears, and walked to the living room. On the mantel was a photo from their early days, her and Richard, young and smiling, full of dreams. She touched the frame, her fingers lingering on the glass. "You thought you broke me," she whispered, "but I'm not done yet." The days that followed were a blur of survival. Eleanor sold what she could: old furniture, jewelry, even Richard's golf clubs. She took a part-time job at the local library, shelving books and helping patrons with a smile that masked her turmoil. The work was humbling, but it gave her purpose. She'd always loved books, their pages a refuge when life felt heavy. Now, they were her anchor. At night, she pored over her investment statements, calculating returns and timelines. The market was volatile, but her diversified portfolio stocks, bonds, a small real estate fund showed promise. She'd chosen carefully, guided by instinct and research. If she could hold on for a few more months, the investments might yield enough to pay off the mortgage and give her a fresh start. It was a gamble, but Eleanor had learned to play the long game. Her children, Michael and Sarah, called often, furious at their father. They offered to help, but Eleanor refused. "This is my fight," she told them. She didn't want pity. She wanted independence. Michael, a lawyer in Chicago, sent her articles on financial recovery, while Sarah, a teacher like Eleanor once was, mailed her homemade cookies and heartfelt letters. Their love was a comfort, but Eleanor knew this journey was hers alone. One evening, as she sipped tea in the quiet house, the phone rang. It was Richard's lawyer, offering a settlement, a pittance compared to what she'd given up for him. Eleanor's voice was steady as she declined. "I don't need his scraps," she said, hanging up. She wasn't bitter, just resolute. She'd rebuild her life, not on his terms, but on hers. The library became her sanctuary. She befriended a group of regulars retirees, mostly, who shared her love of stories and quiet wisdom. One of them, Clara, a sprightly woman in her 70s, noticed Eleanor's tired eyes and invited her to a book club. "You need people, dear," Clara said, her voice warm but firm. Eleanor hesitated, then agreed. The club met weekly, discussing novels over coffee and laughter. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt a spark of belonging. As winter settled over the town, Eleanor's resolve grew. She wasn't just surviving. She was planning. She enrolled in an online course on financial planning, sharpening her skills. She volunteered at a community center, teaching budgeting workshops to young mothers. Helping others gave her strength, a reminder of her own resilience. The divorce papers sat untouched in a drawer, a relic of a life she was leaving behind. But the weight of uncertainty lingered. The mortgage payments loomed, and her part-time wages barely covered utilities. The investments were her hope, but hope wasn't a guarantee. Late at night, when the house creaked and the wind howled, doubt crept in. Had she been foolish to trust in her plan? Would the market crash, taking her dreams with it? She pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the present. One step at a time, she told herself. She'd made it this far. By the end of the first month, Eleanor had sold enough to cover one mortgage payment. It wasn't much, but it was a victory. She celebrated quietly, baking a single cupcake and lighting a candle. As the flame flickered, she made a promise to herself she'd rise from this. Not just for survival, but for herself. For the woman she'd been, and the woman she was becoming. Eleanor's mornings began with routine, a shield against the chaos of her new reality. She'd wake at dawn, brew coffee, and sit by the window, watching the world stir. The library job filled her days, but it was the evenings spent studying her investments and planning her next steps that fueled her. The market reports were a maze of numbers, but she navigated them with growing confidence. Her portfolio, though modest, was her rebellion against Richard's betrayal. The book club became a lifeline. Clara and the others, George, a retired mechanic with a sharp wit, Lila, a former nurse with a gentle laugh, and Tom, a widower who loved poetry, welcomed Eleanor like family. They met in Clara's cozy living room, where the smell of fresh scones mingled with the rustle of pages. The discussions often strayed from novels to life, and Eleanor found herself opening up. She didn't share everything, just enough to feel unburdened. "You're stronger than you know," Clara told her one night, squeezing her hand. Eleanor wanted to believe it. Her children's calls were a mix of comfort and challenge. Michael urged her to sue Richard, to fight for what she deserved. Sarah, softer but no less fierce, suggested Eleanor move closer to her in Boston. But Eleanor wasn't ready to leave the house that held her memories, good and bad. It was her anchor, a symbol of the life she'd built. She'd fight to keep it, even if it meant scraping by. The community center workshops gave her purpose. The young mothers she taught reminded her of herself decades ago, hopeful, overwhelmed, juggling dreams and duties. She shared practical tips: how to stretch a budget, how to save small amounts, how to invest in low-risk funds. Their gratitude warmed her, but it was their questions that sharpened her mind. One woman, Maria, asked about long-term investments, sparking a conversation that lasted past closing time. Eleanor went home that night feeling alive, useful. Her investments were a slow burn. She checked them daily, heart pounding as stocks dipped and rose. The real estate fund was her biggest hope, promising a payout if she could wait 6 more months. She'd chosen it after reading about urban development trends, a calculated risk that felt like a leap of faith. Richard had laughed at her interest in finance, calling it cute. She wondered what he'd think now, seeing her outmaneuver him. But life wasn't all progress. The mortgage loomed, a monthly reminder of her precarious situation. She sold more belongings than old dining set, a silver necklace Richard had given her early in their marriage. Each sale felt like shedding a piece of her past, both painful and freeing. She kept only what mattered, the kids' childhood drawings, her mother's recipe book, the photo on the mantel. One cold February evening, Clara invited Eleanor to a community fundraiser. "It's for the library," she said, eyes twinkling. "You're practically one of us now." Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't socialized much since Richard left, but Clara's insistence won out. The event was lively, with music and homemade pies. Eleanor helped at the donation table, chatting with strangers who became less strange with each smile. A man named Henry, a retired accountant, lingered to talk about books. His quiet humor and kind eyes caught her off guard. She wasn't ready for anything new, but his company was a small warmth in a cold season. The fundraiser raised enough to keep the library's programs running, and Eleanor felt a surge of pride. She'd found a place here, a purpose beyond survival. But the weight of her finances pressed harder. A late utility bill arrived, and she had to dip into her emergency savings money meant for the mortgage. Panic crept in, but she pushed it down, focusing on her investments. The market was unsteady, but her research suggested patience. She clung to that hope like a lifeline. At the book club, they read The Alchemist, and Eleanor found herself drawn to its message of following dreams. She'd sacrificed hers for Richard, but now she was reclaiming them. She started journaling, writing down her fears and hopes. The pages became a map of her resilience, a record of a woman refusing to break. One entry read, "I am not what he left behind. I am what I choose to become." By March, Eleanor had paid another mortgage installment, thanks to a small freelance editing job she'd found online. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She celebrated with a walk through the park, the first signs of spring budding around her. The world felt alive, and for the first time in months. So did she. But the clock was ticking. Her investments needed to mature soon, or the house, her last tether to her past, might slip away. Spring brought a tentative warmth to Eleanor's world, but her financial strain deepened. The mortgage payments were relentless, and her part-time library wages couldn't keep up. She sold her wedding china, a set she'd once cherished, to cover April's bill. The act felt final, like closing a chapter. She didn't cry this time, just packed the plates carefully and handed them to the buyer with a steady hand. Her investments, though, were showing signs of life. The real estate fund had climbed steadily, and her stock picks, carefully chosen after months of research, were holding strong. She spent evenings cross-referencing market trends, her laptop glowing in the dim kitchen. The numbers were a language she was learning to speak, each percentage point a whisper of hope. But hope wasn't enough. She needed results. The book club remained her refuge. Clara noticed Eleanor's quiet determination and began inviting her for coffee outside their meetings. Over steaming mugs, Clara shared her own story: widowed young, raising 3 children alone, building a life from grit and grace. "You're not just surviving, Eleanor," she said one afternoon. "You're thriving, even if you don't see it yet." The words lingered, a seed planted in Eleanor's heart. Her workshops at the community center grew popular. Maria, the young mother from before, brought friends, and soon Eleanor was teaching a small group twice a week. She tailored her lessons to their lives, budgeting for diapers, saving for school fees, investing in small steps. Their progress mirrored her own, a reminder that growth was possible even in hard times. Maria shyly gave Eleanor a handmade scarf as thanks, and Eleanor wore it proudly, a badge of connection. Henry, the accountant from the fundraiser, became a regular at the library. He'd linger at the checkout desk, asking about books or sharing stories of his travels. Eleanor enjoyed his company but kept her distance. Her heart, still bruised from Richard, wasn't ready to trust again. Yet Henry's kindness bringing her a coffee one morning, helping carry heavy boxes chipped away at her walls. "You're a natural teacher," he told her once, nodding toward her workshop flyers. She blushed and used to compliments. A letter from Richard's lawyer arrived, offering another settlement. This one was slightly better, but still insulting. Eleanor tore it up, her hands shaking with resolve. She didn't want his money. She wanted her own. Her investments were close to maturing 3 months, maybe less. She could almost taste freedom. But the mortgage loomed like a storm cloud. A late payment notice arrived, and she had to sell her old sewing machine to cover it. The loss stung, but she focused on the future. One evening, Clara invited Eleanor to a financial seminar at the community center. The speaker, a woman named Diane, was a retired investor who'd built a fortune from modest beginnings. Eleanor listened, rapt, as Diane shared strategies for weathering market dips. After the talk, Eleanor approached her, asking about real estate funds. Diane's eyes lit up. "You've got a good eye," she said, offering to review Eleanor's portfolio. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a lifeline. Diane's feedback was encouraging. Eleanor's choices were solid, though she suggested a few tweaks, rebalancing to reduce risk, diversifying further. Eleanor spent the next week researching, her confidence growing. She wasn't just a housewife anymore. She was a strategist, a survivor. Her journal filled with notes. Risk is part of growth. Trust yourself. But the pressure mounted. The library cut her hours due to budget constraints, leaving her scrambling. She took on more freelance editing, working late into the night. Exhaustion crept in, but she refused to give up. The house was her last stand, a symbol of her resilience. Losing it would mean losing a piece of herself. At the book club, they read A Room of One's Own, and Eleanor felt Virginia Woolf's words like a call to arms. She needed her own space, her own power. She started dreaming bigger, not just of saving the house, but of building a life that was wholly hers. She wrote in her journal, "I am enough. My choices, my strength, my future." By May, her investments were on the cusp of maturity. The real estate fund was projected to yield a significant return, enough to clear the mortgage and give her a cushion. But the market wavered, and doubt gnawed at her. She confided in Clara, who listened quietly before saying, "You've carried heavier burdens than this. You'll carry this too." Eleanor nodded, clinging to that truth. She wasn't broken. She was becoming. Summer arrived, heavy with heat and anticipation. Eleanor's investments were tantalizingly close to maturing, but the market's volatility kept her on edge. Every dip in her portfolio felt like a personal blow, every gain a fragile victory. She checked her accounts obsessively, her heart racing as numbers flickered on the screen. The real estate fund was her anchor, projected to mature in 2 months. If it held, she'd be free of the mortgage. If it didn't, she'd lose everything. Her library hours were cut further, forcing her to lean on freelance work. She edited manuscripts for local authors, her eyes straining over pages late into the night. The extra income kept her afloat, but barely. She sold her old record player, a relic from happier days, to cover June's mortgage. Each sale felt like a sacrifice, But Eleanor saw them as steps toward freedom. She wasn't losing. She was letting go. Clara and the book club remained her anchor. They'd moved on to the House of Mirth. And Eleanor saw herself in Lily Bart's struggle for independence. During one meeting, she shared her story, not all of it, but enough. The group listened, their silence a balm. George, the mechanic, offered to fix her leaky faucet for free. Lila brought her homemade soup. Their kindness was a reminder that she wasn't alone, even when it felt that way. Henry's presence grew steadier. He'd stop by the library with small gifts, a bookmark, a poetry collection. Eleanor found herself smiling more, though she kept her heart guarded. One afternoon, he asked her to coffee. She hesitated, then agreed. Over lattes, he shared his own story, a quiet life, a late wife, a career spent helping others manage money. "You're doing something brave," he told her, his eyes steady. "Not many would rebuild like this." Eleanor looked away, her cheeks warm. She wasn't ready to trust, but his words lingered. Her workshops at the community center flourished. Maria and her friends were saving small amounts, inspired by Eleanor's lessons. One evening, Maria shared that she'd opened her first investment account. "You showed me I could do it," she said, her eyes bright. Eleanor felt a swell of pride, not just for Maria, but for herself. She was making a difference, even as she fought her own battles. Diane, the investor from the seminar, became a mentor. They met weekly, reviewing Eleanor's portfolio and discussing strategies. Diane's confidence was contagious, and Eleanor began to see herself as more than a survivor. She was a strategist, a woman carving her own path. Diane suggested a small reallocation to stabilize her returns, and Eleanor followed through, her hands steady as she made the changes. But the mortgage loomed larger than ever. A second late notice arrived, and Eleanor had to dip into her emergency fund again. The stress was relentless, and doubt crept in. What if the investments failed? What if she'd miscalculated? She confided in Clara, who listened over tea. "You've built something real," Clara said. "Trust it. Trust yourself." Eleanor nodded, but the fear lingered. Her journal became her sanctuary. She wrote about her fears, her hopes, her anger at Richard. One entry read, "He thought he could erase me, but I'm writing my own story now." The act of writing grounded her, a reminder of her resilience. She wasn't just waiting for the investments to mature. She was building a life, piece by piece. One evening, Henry invited her to a local art fair. Eleanor went, drawn by his quiet insistence. They wandered through stalls, admiring paintings and sculptures. For a few hours, she forgot the mortgage, the market, the pain. Henry's laughter was warm, his presence steady. When he brushed her hand accidentally, she didn't pull away. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a spark of something new. By July, the real estate fund was within weeks of maturing. Eleanor's calculations suggested a payout that would clear the mortgage and leave her with a small surplus. But the market wavered, and a sudden dip sent her into a panic. She called Diane, who urged patience. "You've done the work," Diane said. "Hold steady." Eleanor clung to those words, her heart pounding as she watched the numbers. This was her moment, her test. She'd waited 40 years for Richard's promises. Now, she was waiting for her own. August was suffocating, the heat pressing against Eleanor's resolve. The real estate fund was days from maturing, but the market's volatility kept her awake at night. She'd check her portfolio at midnight, at 3 a.m., her heart racing as numbers shifted. The mortgage payment was due in a week, and her bank account was nearly empty. She'd sold everything she could: furniture, keepsakes, even her mother's old ring. The house felt hollow, but it was still hers, and she'd fight to keep it. The library was a lifeline, though her hours were now minimal. She clung to the routine, shelving books with a quiet determination. The patrons noticed her tired eyes, but didn't pry. One morning, a young girl dropped a book, and Eleanor knelt to pick it up, their hands brushing. The girl's shy "thank you" reminded Eleanor why she kept going for moments of connection. For purpose. Clara and the book club were her rock. They'd moved on to Jane Eyre, and Eleanor found strength in Jane's defiance. During one meeting, she broke down, admitting how close she was to losing the house. The group rallied around her. Lila offered to cook meals. George promised to check her car's tires. Tom read her a poem about resilience. Clara pulled her aside after. "You're not alone," she said, her voice fierce. "We're your family now." Eleanor cried, not from despair, but from gratitude. Henry's presence grew steadier. He'd bring her tea at the library, sit with her during breaks, and talk about everything: books, travel, life. One afternoon, he shared his own struggles, losing his wife, rebuilding his life. "You make it look possible," he told her. Eleanor's heart stirred, but fear held her back. She couldn't risk another betrayal, not when she was so close to reclaiming her life. Her workshops were a bright spot. Maria and her group were thriving, some opening savings accounts, others exploring investments. Eleanor tailored her lessons to their dreams: college funds, small businesses, retirement plans. Teaching them reminded her of her own strength, her own dreams. She wasn't just surviving. She was building something lasting. Diane's mentorship was invaluable. They met over coffee, reviewing Eleanor's portfolio. The real estate fund was holding, but a sudden market dip had cost her a small percentage. Diane reassured her, "You've built a strong foundation. It'll hold." Eleanor nodded, but the pressure was crushing. She needed the payout to clear the mortgage, to breathe again. A third late notice arrived, and Eleanor's heart sank. She had no more to sell, no more to give. She called Michael, breaking her own rule. "I might lose the house," she admitted, her voice shaking. Michael offered to pay the mortgage, but Eleanor refused. "This is my fight," she said, though her resolve wavered. Sarah sent a care package: books, tea, a letter promising to visit soon. Their love was a lifeline, but the weight was hers to carry. Her journal was her refuge. She wrote, "I'm scared, but I'm not broken. I've built this, and I'll see it through." The words were a promise, a vow to herself. She wasn't Richard's wife anymore. She was Eleanor, a woman carving her own path. One evening, Henry invited her to dinner at his home. Eleanor hesitated, then accepted. His small house was warm, filled with books and photos of his late wife. Over pasta, they talked about their pasts, their fears. Henry's kindness was a quiet strength, and when he reached for her hand, she let him. It wasn't love not yet, but it was trust, a step toward healing. The market took another dip, and Eleanor's portfolio wavered. She called Diane, her voice tight with panic. "Hold on," Diane said. "You're almost there." Eleanor clung to those words, checking her accounts obsessively. The real estate fund was projected to mature in 3 days. 3 days until freedom, or failure. She barely slept, her dreams filled with numbers and loss. But in her waking moments, she held fast to her resolve. She'd come too far to give up now. The final days of August were a crucible. Eleanor's investments were set to mature, but the market swings kept her on edge. She checked her portfolio hourly, her heart pounding as the real estate fund teetered. The mortgage payment was due tomorrow, and her bank account held just enough for groceries. She'd sold everything she could, stripped the house to its bones. But she wasn't defeated, not yet. The library was quiet. Her hours now a single shift a week. She shelved books with a mechanical focus, her mind on the numbers. A patron, an older man, noticed her distraction and offered a kind word. "You look like someone carrying the world," he said. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Just a corner of it," she replied. His kindness stayed with her, a reminder of the small connections that kept her grounded. Clara and the book club rallied around her. They'd finished Jane Eyre, and Eleanor felt a kinship with Jane's fierce independence. At their meeting, she shared her fear the investments might not be enough. Clara hugged her tightly. "You've carried heavier loads," she said. "This one's no different." George offered to mow her lawn. Lila brought casseroles, and Tom read a poem about hope. Their support was a lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't alone. Henry's presence was a quiet comfort. He'd stop by with coffee, sit with her in the park, and listen without pushing. One evening, he invited her to a local concerto, small orchestra playing in the town square. Eleanor went, drawn by his steady warmth. The music was a balm, easing the knot in her chest. When Henry took her hand, she didn't pull away. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was possibility. A crack in the walls she'd built. Her workshops were a triumph. Maria and her group were saving, investing, dreaming bigger. One woman, Anna, shared that she'd started a small catering business, inspired by Eleanor's lessons. "You made me believe I could," Anna said, her eyes shining. Eleanor felt a surge of pride, not just for them, but for herself. She was more than Richard's shadow. She was a teacher, a guide, a woman with purpose. Diane's mentorship was her anchor. They met daily now, reviewing the portfolio. The real estate fund was holding its maturity date tomorrow. Diane was optimistic but cautious. "You've done everything right," she said. "Now you wait." Eleanor nodded. But waiting was agony. She'd waited 40 years for Richard's promises. This wait, though shorter, felt just as heavy. Her journal was her refuge. She wrote, "Tomorrow decides everything. I'm ready. Whatever comes." The words were a vow, a claim on her future. She wasn't just surviving. She was fighting for herself, for the life she deserved. The night before the payout, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, the divorce papers in front of her. She hadn't signed them yet, hadn't accepted Richard's terms. They felt like a surrender, and she wasn't ready to surrender. She tore them up, her hands steady. This was her story now, not his. The morning of the payout dawned bright and merciless. Eleanor logged into her investment account, her fingers trembling. The real estate fund had matured, and the numbers were there enough to clear the mortgage, pay the bills, and give her a small cushion. She stared at the screen, tears streaming down her face. She'd done it. She'd saved herself. She called Diane, her voice shaking with relief. "You were right," Eleanor said. "It held." Diane laughed, her pride clear. "You held," she corrected. Eleanor smiled, the weight lifting. She paid the mortgage that afternoon. The bank teller's congratulations, a small victory. The house was hers, free and clear. That evening, Henry came by with flower simple daisies, her favorite. They sat on her porch, the air warm with summer's last breath. "You're incredible," he said, his eyes soft. Eleanor looked at him, her heart opened just a fraction. "I'm learning that," she replied. For the first time in months, she felt light, unburdened. She'd face the abyss and come out stronger. The future was hers to shape. With the mortgage paid, Eleanor felt a freedom she hadn't known in decades. The house, once a weight, was now a sanctuary hers, earned through her own grit. Her investments had come through, not just saving her home, but giving her a small surplus to rebuild. She wasn't rich, but she was free, and that was enough. The library welcomed her back with a few extra hours. A small victory. She shelved books with a new lightness, chatting with patrons and recommending novels. The young girl who dropped the book months ago became a regular, shyly asking Eleanor for stories. Their talks were a reminder of the life she was building, one of connection, purpose, and quiet joy. Clara and the book club celebrated her triumph. They'd moved on to Their Eyes Were Watching God, and Eleanor saw herself in Janie's journey to self-discovery. At their meeting, she shared her victory: the house, the investments, the freedom. The group toasted her with tea and laughter, Clara's eyes shining with pride. "You're a force," she said, hugging Eleanor tightly. George fixed her porch step. Lila baked a cake, and Tom read a poem about new beginnings. Their love was a foundation she hadn't expected. Henry's presence grew warmer, steadier. He invited her to walks, to dinners, to quiet evenings at his home. Eleanor let herself enjoy his company, though her heart was cautious. One evening, over coffee, he shared his dream of traveling again, maybe to Italy. "Come with me," he said, half joking. Eleanor laughed, but the idea lingered, a spark of adventure she hadn't allowed herself in years. Her workshops were thriving. Maria and her group were building future savings accounts, small investments, dreams taking shape. Eleanor expanded the classes, adding sessions on financial independence for women. The community center director praised her work, offering a paid position. Eleanor accepted, her confidence growing. She wasn't just teaching, she was inspiring, proof that it was never too late to start over. Diane remained a mentor and friend. They met weekly, discussing not just investments, but life. Diane shared her own story: divorced young, rebuilding through sheer will. "You're my hero," Diane told her, laughing. Eleanor shook her head, but the words warmed her. She was no hero, just a woman who'd refused to break. Her children visited, their pride palpable. Michael, usually reserved, hugged her tightly. "You did this on your own," he said. Sarah, teary-eyed, brought her kids, who ran through the house Eleanor had fought to keep. They baked cookies, laughed, and filled the rooms with life. Eleanor felt whole, not just for them, but for herself. Her journal filled with new dreams, teaching more classes, traveling, maybe writing a book about her journey. One entry read, "I am not what I lost. I am what I've built." The words were a declaration, a promise to the woman she was becoming. One evening, Henry invited her to a local play. They sat close, his hand brushing hers. Afterward, over wine, he spoke of his feelings, quiet, honest, unguarded. Eleanor's heart raced, but she didn't pull away. "I'm not ready," she admitted, "but I'm not saying no." Henry smiled, his patience a gift. She wasn't ready for love, but she was open to possibility. The surplus from her investments gave her breathing room. She reinvested a portion, following Diane's advice, and set aside some for herself: a new chair for the living room, a painting class she'd always wanted to take. Small steps, but they were hers. She wasn't just surviving, she was living. As September began, Eleanor stood on her porch, the air crisp with change. The house was hers, the future open. She'd face betrayal, loss, and fear, and come out stronger. Richard's absence was a shadow, but it no longer defined her. She was Eleanor Grayson, a woman who'd rebuilt her life from the ashes. And she was just getting started. Fall painted the town in golds and reds, mirroring the warmth in Eleanor's heart. The house was hers, the mortgage a memory. Her investments had not only saved her, but given her a foundation to dream again. She wasn't wealthy, but she was free to choose, to build, to live on her terms. The library became a second home. Her hours were steady now, and she found joy in the routine, helping patrons, recommending books, chatting with the young girl who'd become her shadow. The girl, Lily, loved mysteries, and Eleanor read them with her. Their talks a quiet bond. Lily's curiosity reminded Eleanor of her own, a spark she'd nurtured through years of sacrifice. Clara and the book club were her family. They'd moved on to the Nightingale, and Eleanor felt the strength of its women in her own journey. At their meetings, she shared her plans, teaching more workshops, maybe traveling. Clara beamed. "You're unstoppable," she said, raising a glass. George fixed her fence. Lila brought pies, and Tom wrote her a poem titled Eleanor's Light. Their love was a gift, a reminder that she'd built more than a portfolio, built a community. Henry's presence was a steady warmth. They spent evenings together, walks in the park, dinners at small cafes, quiet nights reading by his fireplace. He didn't push, didn't demand. One evening, he showed her photos of his late wife's garden, sharing stories of their life. Eleanor opened up about Richard, the pain, the triumph. "You're extraordinary," Henry said, his voice soft. She smiled, her heart opening wider. She wasn't ready for love, but she was ready for trust. Her workshops were a cornerstone. The community center expanded her classes, and women from across town joined, young mothers, retirees, single women rebuilding. Maria opened her own investment account. Anna's catering business grew, and others followed. Eleanor's lessons were practical but infused with hope. You could start small, dream big, and rise again. The director offered her a full-time role, and Eleanor accepted, her purpose clear. She was a teacher, a guide, a beacon. Diane remained a friend and mentor. They met monthly, discussing investments and life. Diane encouraged Eleanor to write about her journey, a book, perhaps, to inspire others. Eleanor laughed, but the idea took root. She started drafting, her journal evolving into chapters. "Your story matters," Diane said. Eleanor was beginning to believe it. Her children visited often, their pride a quiet strength. Michael helped her set up a new investment plan. Sarah brought her kids for weekends of laughter and baking. The house, once a battleground, was alive with love. Eleanor felt whole, not just as a mother, but as a woman who'd reclaimed her life. Her journal was a testament to her growth. One entry read, "I am not defined by what I lost, but by what I've gained: strength, community, myself." She wrote of dreams, a trip to Italy with Henry, a book for women like her, a life of purpose. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. One crisp October evening, Henry invited her to a harvest festival. They danced under string lights, her laughter mingling with his. When he kissed her cheek, she didn't flinch. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was joy, a promise of what could be. She felt alive, unburdened by the past. Eleanor stood on her porch one morning, the world bright with possibility. The house was hers, the future hers to shape. She'd faced betrayal, rebuilt from nothing, and found herself. Richard was a distant memory, his absence irrelevant. She was Eleanor Grayson, teacher, survivor, dreamer. Her investments had matured, but so had she. The horizon stretched wide, and she was ready to meet it.